Thus far, despite the slow gain in altitude, the going was still lush. Unlike most people who travel to this area in April and early May, we were here in June. The monsoons had already started. We had no choice, having to work with our son's school schedule. There was an advantage to this, though. The trail was practically empty. Monsoons had set in, leaving the pastures lush and juicy for the yak and the nark or dree and their fuzzy little babies, cute little things that were finding their feet. The first part from Ledar to Thorong Phedi base camp was on the lush side of the mountain. Then one had to cross a bridge and the landscape would change forever. It seemed odd as we descended to cross the bridge that we were still ascending to descend. We would go from about 13,120 feet at Churi Ledar to 14,885 feet at Thorong Phedi base camp. This was an altitude difference of 1,765 feet approximately, but at that altitude, every step higher made a difference. These beautiful horses that looked like mustangs were the local transport. Patiently carried everything up and down these mountains. The beautiful Gangapurna was somewhere behind us as she towered over the valleys in front of her, barely visible now, partly because of the clouds and partly because of our route. Down below, the riverbed glimmered, glistening with stones. We met up with a couple, Eric and Lisa, and we would bump into them a couple of times more. The path is like a scratch in the mountains, and you can see the bridge very clearly from the satellite map. The descent to the bridge was rather treacherous. The path was a narrow one, gouged out amidst the loose rock and rubble. The bridge itself looked rather rickety, with a swift stream gushing down underneath. One by one, we reached the bridge and crossed the stream and waited on the other side for the others to catch up. Once we crossed, we could see our path very clearly. It certainly looked crazy. All that rubble and loose stones, and we had actually come down that zigzag and that slope. But the best was yet to come. While the grass did look greener on the other side, the terrain slowly turned a little ominous. From the bridge, if one went along the river up the trail, one could see a waterfall and a snow-clad peak. Apparently, we had to go all the way up to this rock face and then above. My God, it did look daunting, but at the same time, incredibly exciting. The fresh air that we were breathing was energizing, even though the altitude made us pant. It was along this valley that we were walking on the left-hand side. New path, new views. Here were different snow-clad peaks. We didn't know their names or their heights, but they certainly looked majestic. And it is somewhere in between these peaks that Thorong La lay. You could see the edge of another glacier and the waterfall that trickled from it as the snow melted. Clear as day. As usual, we walked in single file. Maitreya was, as always, ahead, Aravind just behind him, and me somewhere behind. But somehow we always managed to stop and come together and take in these beautiful sights.
In fact, Maitreya wanted to come again. was a very hard stretch. See, the thing is, altitude mixed with the...
4,365, which means that we lost 13,000 feet.
See, altitude is getting...
Yes, 30,000.
Because the path wasn't
It was. Going up, it was like what we did before. Only it was shorter than what we did before, I'll grant you that. But the altitude makes a difference. The oxygen, yes. Now what have we completed everything?
We managed some beautiful and close up views of the range in front of us, even as we all got together and rested. We managed to chat, argue a little bit about altitude and abilities, and move on.
This.
No, no, 1 week. 1 week. Just, just 1 week. Actually, don't know.
Maitreya was very concerned and supportive of his grandmother, and Aravind, ever chivalrous, brought water for us all. This feature on the hillside was rather odd. It seems like there was a landslide, but everything stopped just short of the river. There were still flowers on the hillside, mountainside, I should say, actually, and there were trails of rubble where the soil had slipped all the way down, and there was no vegetation. We enjoyed our views of the flowers, caught our breath, and braced ourselves for what was to come. Ahead was a huge area of landslide. We were going to leave these pretty bushes and lovely flowers far behind. We grouped together, discussed the strategy, and then forged ahead. We would go one at a time, as fast as possible, across the rubble train. Everybody's pack was checked, everybody drank water, and then was the challenge. You could see the scars of the landslide even on the satellite maps. The important thing was to keep moving and moving fast until you went past this loose rubble rock so that it would not slide away from under your feet and take you where you don't want to go. A sign announced our arrival very kindly. Landslide area, it said. We set out one at a time. Since my mother, the photographer, was behind me, we got these photographs of us crossing the landslide area. You could see us as little dots on the path. Treading the path carefully, we went through, praying every step of the way that there would be no untoward movement on the ground. There seems to have been an incredible rock slide from this mountain, and the river seemed to disappear far into these high chasms. There was a waterfall that seemed to be joining the river. We were, after all, walking upstream. What you see as a dry mass on top of the mountains was once filled with snow. The eye was always drawn upwards towards the sky, towards the white caps, the crowns of glory that distinguished the lofty peaks. Playful Bharat showed us our destination. Right at the edge, at what seemed to be at the bottom of the waterfall, under the glacier, was the Thorong Phedi base camp. Thanks for watching this What is India production. Give us a like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications.